Hello, I'm Jack Fink, and you're watching Eye on Politics, our first after the midterm election on CBS News, Dallas-Fort Worth. Another midterm election in Texas and another sweep by Republicans of all statewide offices. The polls leading to the election proved accurate as there were no political surprises or upsets. The top three Republicans won a third term. Governor Greg Abbott defeated Democrat Beto O'Rourke by 11 percentage points, 55 to 44%. He spoke with his supporters in McAllen Tuesday night.
Texans sent a very resounding message. They want to keep Texas the beacon of opportunity that we have provided over the past 8 years. A Texas where working families can flourish. A Texas where students can be prepared and inspired for college or for a career. A Texas that supports our law enforcement officers and our military. So now it's time to go to work for all of those people as well as for all Texans. And it starts by keeping Texas as the #1 state for the best economy in America and the #1 state for jobs. We must tap into our $27 billion budget surplus and use that to give our property owners the largest property tax cut in the history of Texas. We must fight against Joe Biden's war against oil and gas and keep Texas #1 for oil and gas production in the United States of America.
Despite his unsuccessful run for president and his second loss in a statewide race, O'Rourke told supporters in his hometown of El Paso that he's not giving up on his goals for the state.
We just want a state where people are free enough and healthy enough to be able to pursue their potential and rise to fulfill their true promise. A state where we are not defined or divided based on our differences, but find the common interest for the common good right here on the common ground before us. Well, that still is the Texas that I want to live in. That is the dream that I, and I hope all of us, will continue to pursue. I don't know what form that will take. I don't know what my role or yours will be going forward, but I'm in this fight for life.
Despite the fact that O'Rourke raised more money this year than the governor and had statewide name recognition, former Dallas County Sheriff Lupe Valdez, who ran against Abbott in 2018, received nearly 19,000 more votes against the governor than O'Rourke did. While the governor won Tarrant, Collin, and Denton counties, his margins of victory all declined from 2018 in those counties, and he lost by a greater margin in Dallas County than 4 years ago. Governor Abbott's campaign team spoke with reporters on Wednesday morning, and they told us that they still have work to do to build up their infrastructure and support in the suburban counties. In the lieutenant governor's race, which was a rematch from 2018, Dan Patrick once again came out on top, defeating Democrat Mike Collier by 11 percentage points, 54 to 43%, which is a wider margin than 4 years ago. In the Attorney General's race, Ken Paxton beat Democrat Rochelle Garza by a 9 percentage point margin, 53 to 44%. He told supporters Tuesday night in Plano that his political demise was exaggerated.
The fight is not over. They're going to continue to come after me. They're going to continue to come after Texas. They're going to continue to come after Republicans around the country. And we cannot let them win. And look what's going on around the country, because we did not give up. And Texas did not give up.
In Houston, Garza told supporters not to give up.
Texas is worth investing in, and there is momentum and support for the issues that we centered this campaign around.
In some of the other major statewide contests, Comptroller Glenn Hagar defeated Democrat Janet Dudding by 15 percentage points, 56 to 41%. In the Land Commissioner's race, former State Senator Dawn Buckingham beat Democrat Jay Clayburgh 56 to 42%. The seat opened up after George P. Bush ran unsuccessfully for Attorney General in the Republican primary. Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller defeated Democrat Susan Hayes 56 to 44%, and in the race for Railroad Commissioner, Wayne Christian defeated Democrat Luke Warford 55 to 41%. Now we'll take a look at some of our key counties. Dallas County, which has been solid blue, Democrats made some gains. The Commissioner's Court is now fully served by Democrats for the first time. In Precinct 2, Democrat Andrew Summerman defeated the Republican incumbent J.J. Koch. Democrats redrew the district. Democrats retained control of countywide offices, including for judge, where incumbent Clay Jenkins defeated his Republican challenger Lauren Davis 63 to 37%. And in another rematch from 2018, District Attorney John Creuzot once again defeated Faith Johnson 59 to 41%. We spoke with Dallas County Democratic Party Chair Christy Noble.
You know, the county commissioners, they work on things that are going to affect everyday lives of people in Dallas County. You know, they're working for, public health, for transportation, making sure we have broadband, things like that. And so it's going to affect people's daily lives on an ongoing basis. And it's going to make it easier to move forward good policies within Dallas County to support County Judge Clay Jenkins.
And was this a huge shift as far as the district boundaries are concerned, so that it was clear that this would become a Democratic district, or is there still a significance in the fact that it's all Democratic? In other words, did this happen just because of redistricting?
There were some changes in the lines, but it wasn't just because it was through redistricting. It is obvious that the values of the people of Dallas County are moving in the direction of being parallel to our democratic values. And so redistricting, there were some line changes, but when it comes down to it, the wants and the needs of Dallas County and the movement of how folks think and in Dallas County is moving more in our direction.
And the Democrats in Dallas County held on to the state house seats that it had.
Yes.
And also the county offices as far as judge and the DA. Was there any concern on your part that may not have been the case? As you get close to the election day on any election cycle, you have the angst of, okay, are we really in line with the numbers and the way we've been reaching out to folks and what we've seen? But when it comes down to it, I felt confident that we were going to hold the judge seat. I felt confident that we were going to hold the DA seat. And what is really extraordinary about the first election after redistricting for our county is that we also flipped, not only the county commissioner 2, we also flipped a constable seat from red to blue, and we also flipped a JP seat from red to blue. So now from a county perspective, as far as county officials, there's only one JP seat that is a Republican seat. And as far as the House districts, we held every House district within the county. There was a very largely redistricted House District 114 that we won by a landslide. And we were very close in the 2 House districts, 108 and 112, than we really should have been at going into this first election after the redistricting. So here in Dallas County, we feel really good about how we held everything and moved forward just a little bit. Why do you believe that Dallas County has become more blue?
I'm gonna go out on a limb here to say that it hasn't necessarily become more blue. It's that it has always been blue. And there's been a certain number of people that haven't voted, and there has been a certain way that we have reached out and started to get more information and education and voter engagement. Even though the numbers were down, we have included our people in Dallas County within the voting process, and we're going to continue to do that. In 2018, we had, I believe, 6 House districts that were very, very competitive. We had 2 congressional districts that were very, very competitive. We had a top of the ticket run of Beto against Ted Cruz. And when it comes down to it, Ted Cruz is really hated within our county. And so there, and within the state in terms of the Democratic voters. And so there was a lot of push there. And obviously, that was the first election after Trump was elected. There was a lot more engagement, and that it was really a referendum on that Trump election. So there were a lot of issues at play, bringing up a very high voter engagement than we've had before in Texas in general, and obviously here in Dallas County. So when we look at all those key factors, it was more of an outlier in terms of the regular progression of Texas and Dallas County and getting out the vote. And also, if we look at the numbers across the state, that also plays true, that it's not just Dallas County where voting was down, it was across the state. And so that also plays into those indicators that I mentioned. And so the real apples to apples comparison, if we want to look at numbers, would be more like the 2014 midterm. And we definitely outperformed the 2014 midterm. And I will say just one more thing, Jack, is from a Dallas County perspective, again, we held all of our seats. There were other counties within Texas that lost some Democratic seats. So we are very happy with our performance.
Let me ask you about the impact on the statewide election.
Oh, there was definitely an impact, right? The other things that I think impacted the lower turnout was obviously historically in the midterm elections, the party that has the president usually has a rough time keeping seats and expanding, and that's been talked about in the national news at this point. So that was playing against us. I also think that we have gone through the 2016 cycle, the 2018 cycle, and the 2020 cycle, where politics was not just information coming at us on, here and there throughout the news cycle, or here and there on the 24-hour news programs, but it was constant. Government and politics used to kind of be boring, right? And for the last 6 years, it has been at the forefront. And I think that there is a lot of political fatigue within the voting community. And I think that kind of played into it. And so there definitely was an impact. And I think as from a Democratic side, what I know that we need to do going forward is make sure that we're messaging to communities in any way that we can slice and dice the Democratic electorate, right? And we need to be doing some deep organizing, and we're going to be working on doing that in a strategic fashion over the next 2 years as we go into the 2024 cycle.
Do you have any estimate of how many Democrats may have stayed home this time?
I don't have those numbers, but I guarantee you I will have those numbers. We're going to be digging into that data and really understanding, based on our outreach and our plan over the last 6 months of working to talk to people, to get information out to people who are typical Democratic leaning folks, but typically haven't voted. How many of those folks actually did come out? And so as we move forward and do that analysis, I'll definitely share that with you as we get that.
I did have one other question for you, and I wasn't there, but I did watch the rally that Beto O'Rourke had in Dallas last Thursday night.
Mm-hmm.
And Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, who of course is retiring at the end of this year after nearly 30 years in Congress, really meant to rally. She rallied the folks there, and she said, "We're behind, and you aren't doing enough to get out the vote." Did that have any impact on the early vote at all?
So that was, you
That
know,
was the
that was the Thursday before the last day of the early
correct.
vote. And
Correct.
we had a huge day of the last day of the early vote. And there was a huge turnout right at that Oaklawn library. So, I mean, anecdotally, we can absolutely say that had an impact. Eddie Bernice Johnson has always been loved in that community, in that portion of her district. And I was there that night, and it was definitely an electric room, especially when she was talking. So I can't say for sure, but like I said, the Oaklawn Library had a huge turnout the next day.
All right, Dallas County Democratic Party Chair Christy Noble, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jack.
In Tarrant County, Republicans are celebrating as the county stayed red. In one of the biggest races, Republican Tim O'Hare defeated Democrat Deborah Peoples 53 to 47% to become the next county judge. The current judge, Glenn Whitley, is retiring at the end of the year. And in another open seat, Republican Phil Sorrells defeated Democrat Tiffany Burks 53 to 47% to become the next district attorney. Sharon Wilson, the current DA, is also retiring at the end of the year. We spoke with Tarrant County Republican Party Chair Rick Barnes.
We're happy to remain the reddest urban county in the country. We know that we always have work to continue to do, but we're very happy with this election. We're happy with the votes that we received on our side. We got to work a little bit more on turnout, I think, across the board, but the turnout leaned in our direction, so we're happy with the results.
And before I talk a little bit more about turnout, why do you think the Republicans did as well as they did this time around?
Well, frankly, we had a very good group of candidates on the ballot. They were all extremely qualified, extremely talented in what their intent was to do in their offices. And we worked as a team. We had probably the best team approach that we've ever had in an election. And came together as a group and really worked it. We've been working for about a year and a half to get ready for this election with a lot of the candidates, and it all paid off at the end of the day.
And as far as turnout is concerned, you had 632,000 back in 2018, 590,000 this time around. It was 56% turnout 4 years ago, 47% turnout this year. So why do you think that is?
Well, we're still analyzing the exact numbers to know where that turnout came from, to know whether or not that was actually on our side or the other side of the ticket. But I think the reality is that the excitement level over on our side of the ticket was strong, and we had those numbers turn out for our folks, but we're not sure across the board. I think on the other side of the ticket, it was a weak ticket. You had two candidates on that side that had lost two elections simultaneously. They were up for the third, and then now they've lost their third. The turnout just gets low when you have that kind of candidate turnout. But again, we're happy with the turnout and that we won those elections, and we'll look at what that means as we continue to analyze the numbers.
With so many people phone banking and block walking and on social media, how is it that with more, going on by the campaigns, by the parties themselves, how is it that fewer people vote when there was much more?
Sure, there was a big turnout for new registration, and that's the thing that I think we got to look at is whether those new registrants actually turned out to vote or not. That skews the overall percentages at the end. But yeah, there was a whole lot of work done with our people within those particular districts where we had heavy races going on. And again, they came out to vote. We will have to look at the numbers to see what it caused it in the overall.
And then my last question to you, and that is, there were a lot of predictions by Republicans nationally that this was going to be a red wave, even red tsunami. We heard Senator Ted Cruz say that. And when you look nationally, that didn't happen. Do you have any thoughts on why that may be? And then compare that to what happened here in the state, in Texas.
Well, we were cautioning against that kind of language from the very beginning. Every time we heard the word tsunami or even the wave, I actually heard somebody use the word red hurricane. We were cautioning against that because the reality is we're in a time where we're really divisive as a country. There's I just think that getting that braggy about it on the front end is always a risk, and so we cautioned against the language from the very beginning. We're watching these numbers nationally. They're still happening in a lot of states. Luckily, in Texas and frankly in Tarrant County, we didn't have to deal with those issues near as much. We still did a strong election for us in Tarrant and statewide. We had our statewide candidates coming along and win these races, and so that kind of language, we always caution against that. The worst thing we can do is get to where we're cocky about it, thinking that we're going to win these elections automatically, get lackadaisical. We always caution against that kind of work, those kinds of words.
Tarrant County Republican Party Chair Rick Barnes, thank you so much as always. We really appreciate it.
Jack, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And in Dallas, voters approved Prop A to raise hotel taxes to build a new convention center and renovate much of Fair Park. Our Steve Pickett has details.
This building was built in 1936 as part of the Texas Centennial Exhibition. Fair Park's pretty special. This is one of the only National Historic Landmarks.
80-plus years of Dallas history. The place produced to promote Texas's history. The plan to rebuild this old outdoor music venue, for example, and turned into this. Or reminding people that the Fair Park Coliseum, a sports and entertainment center that still exists here as well.
We have a great set of bones here, and with an appropriate upgrade, we're going to be able to turn this into a thriving year-round arena.
Brian Llewellyn leads Fair Park First. 6 sites, including the old Coliseum, help define Fair Park, from the Cotton Bowl to the Art Deco-inspired exposition halls. These historic buildings will face repairs, renovation, and upgrades, financed with hotel tax dollars cleared by voters on Tuesday.
Earnestly, this is a game changer for Fair Park. This is the biggest infusion of capital that Fair Park has ever received. The last time anyone invested anything close to this was when they built the site.
Prop A's $300 million investment here will take about 7 years, we're told, but the work to enhance Dallas's most historic site starts now. At Fair Park, Steve Pickett, CBS 11 News.
It was a tough election day for Democrats who ran for statewide office this year. Republicans have now maintained control of statewide offices since 1994, 28 years. We spoke with Dr. Joshua Blank, research director of the Texas Politics Project at UT Austin.
Yeah, I don't think in the end it was terribly surprising. I know that it's always easy after an election to say, well, this is what we thought was going to happen. But, all of the polling leading up to this point gave Republicans healthy, if not pretty comfortable leads in all of the major statewide races. And then when we look more broadly at the national environment, and in particular, even at the Texas environment, both really had evolved throughout the end of the election in a way that really favored Republicans if they hadn't already been favoring, Republican candidates from the start.
You're right. I mean, the Democrats knew last year this was going to be a tough year for them, and based on historical purposes. But then when you look at what the top issues were, inflation, border, and crime, you're saying that really was the message that trumped everything.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Texas is not, Pennsylvania, for example. And if you look at some of the exit polling out of Pennsylvania, a nominally Democratic state, the top issue that people were raising there was abortion. So it's not surprising to see the Democratic candidate get pushed over the finish line there. In Texas, we've never seen an environment that looked like that in this cycle. And you're right, the issues that voters persistently raised were the border and inflation. And then I think, largely due to, the effectiveness of a lot of the Republican campaigns, public safety, started to rise as we got closer and closer to Election Day. These are 3 issues that if you're a Republican candidate with a Democratic administration in the White House, I'm sure you were licking your lips before the campaign even started, thinking about what would happen and how easy it might be. Now, the only interesting thing is that, nationally, if not necessarily in Texas, it wasn't that easy.
And I wanted to ask you, when you look at some of the counties where Governor Abbott won, he did win some border counties. He won Uvalde County by 22 percentage points, 60 to 38. So what's your impression of that? Did that surprise you that the governor won by that much, especially since O'Rourke repeatedly campaigned there, repeatedly talked about, gun sale restrictions, talked with the families of the victims, included them in his commercials. So what do you make of all that?
Well, as important of an issue as gun violence was in this election, and in particular to Hispanic voters, most Hispanic voters, like most voters in Texas, were really still concerned about inflation and the economy. And I think, it's a little bit early to talk about, the full impact, I think, of Republican efforts to mobilize voters in South Texas. But I think, early on, sort of really the hours in some ways after the election is over, as we're sitting here talking about this, when you look at those results, it doesn't look like Republicans made massive gains in terms of actual vote counts in a lot of these places. They may have, fundamentally shifted the vote percentages a little bit. But when we look, for example, at the Rio Grande Valley, Democrats tended to still do very well in most of those counties and still tended to get a majority of the vote in those counties. But in a down year for Democrats, in some cases, that wasn't going to be enough. For example, in Congressional District 15.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton, because the polls were accurate, because leading into the election, the lieutenant governor was ahead of Mike Collier by about 11 percentage points, and that's what it ends up being. And then Ken Paxton was averaging about 9 percentage points over Rochelle Garza, and he came out ahead by 11 percentage points. And he has legal issues, but you and I have discussed this before, that obviously is not a top concern.
Well, it's not. And to be honest, to the extent that voters know about the legal problems of the current, attorney general, that knowledge, number one, is heavily concentrated among Democratic voters who were not going to vote for Ken Paxton under any circumstances. And for those Republican voters who are aware of Ken Paxton's legal problems, whether because they follow politics closely, or maybe they followed the primary campaign, or have just become aware, due to the course of the 2022 campaign, in many cases, these voters had already cast a ballot for Ken Paxton while he was under indictment in the last election. And so the idea that this is, somehow a problem for him was, I think, a possibility that stirred a lot of imagination, especially combined with the Dobbs decision and Texas's, decision to subsequently prohibit abortion in the state. The idea was that this race might be a little bit different than the other ones, but ultimately that was more of an idea than a reality. Rochelle Garza, ultimately, as attractive of a candidate as she may have been, was still a Democratic candidate in Texas who began the race with no name recognition, completely a non-entity in the electorate, who then had to spend most of the campaign introducing herself. Ultimately, at the end, it's not surprising to find that Ken Paxton, Dan Patrick, and Greg Abbott all performed pretty similarly, and the Democratic candidates challenging them also all performed pretty similarly. And that's a reflection of the polarized political environment we live in, and the difficulty, I think, at this point of any issue to really disqualify a candidate as long as that candidate is a member of your party.
When you go back and you look at the issues that the state has faced, Uvalde, the winter storm from 2021 with the widespread power outages, and I'm wondering the fact that Beto O'Rourke raised even more money than the governor, which hasn't been done before, and attracted big crowds, and the fact that he still lost by almost as much as a percentage to Lupe Valdez, who didn't have nearly the resources that O'Rourke was able to have. What does that say about Beto O'Rourke and just Democrats statewide?
Well, I think those are two different questions. I think for Democrats statewide, it really points to the challenges that Democrats face. Ultimately, Texas is becoming a more competitive state, but for Democrats to be competitive, they are heavily reliant on the overarching conditions. Democrats can't have a bad or even merely an okay election nationally and have Texas Democrats expecting to turn Texas blue. Ultimately, they need something that is heavily in their favor, like they faced in 2018 and to a lesser extent in 2020. And I think that's where the difference is when thinking about O'Rourke, and especially comparisons with Lupe Valdez. I think you're right to point out that Lupe Valdez was an under-resourced and in many ways underwhelming candidate in that campaign, in which Democrats had a lot of wind at their back. But likewise, as high quality of a candidate as O'Rourke is, there's only so much he can do in an environment that was always going to be tough for any Democrat, even a Democrat as well known and well resourced as O'Rourke. Given the fact that with a Democrat in the White House, with economic concerns, rampant, and with incredibly low, job approval for that president in the state, it would have taken some sort of Herculean effort and probably or some kind of major, if not multiple major mistakes by the incumbent to even really put Democrats within, I would say, a reasonable distance to be competitive this cycle. So for that, I wouldn't say that I would just attribute less to O'Rourke than in this than many would. I think in 2018, O'Rourke was given a lot of credit, some of which he deserved, but some of which was also due to the fact that Democrats were running candidates up and down the ballot throughout the state, and the Democratic voters wanted to cast a ballot against Donald Trump. In 2022, a third of the legislature, after redistricting, was elected without an actual contest because they faced no challenger. And what we're returning to is a more, ho-hum political environment, which ultimately has tended to favor Republicans in this state. And so I think you have to take all that into context when thinking about, O'Rourke's role, his success and or his failure, whether you're talking about, his quote unquote successes in 2018, or if you want to talk about his failures in 2022.
The governor's campaign held a news conference, sort of just going through the election this morning, and they said that O'Rourke's unfavorables were still higher than his favorables, and he never changed that during the course of this election. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a fair assessment, but I think it also leaves out the fact that voter attitudes towards Governor Abbott were rather ambivalent as well. The governor was barely ever in positive waters in his job approval ratings, and same holds with the favorability numbers. So yes, it's true that O'Rourke was never able to get out of the basement in terms of voter attitudes towards him. But it wasn't as though this was an election in which you could say, but the voters really liked Greg Abbott, they didn't like Beto O'Rourke. Reality is the voters were not really impressed with either candidate, and they chose continuity over change.
I was just going to say, but at the end of the day, 11 percentage points is still 11 percentage points, no?
Yeah, it definitely is. But I would say this is also more of just a return to what we think of as kind of a normal Texas election. This is what Texas elections look like when Democrats are not as motivated as they were in 2018 and 2020, and Republicans are motivated. But it's not. But I'll also point out in 2014, Greg Abbott won by 20 points. So it's not as though this actually isn't, again, this is sort of something that I say that I think for the benefit of Democrats who start to get disheartened by this, but ultimately political change is slow. And if you start to look around at the results in some of these pockets around the state where Democrats feel like they're gaining in and around the big cities, ultimately you look at those numbers and right now, based on the preliminary results, Beto O'Rourke seems to have been performing better as a percentage of the vote in many of those areas than certainly Wendy Davis did, certainly than Lupe Valdez did. And Greg Abbott is performing worse in those areas. So for Democrats who want to, look at this and say, maybe we should just give up, the reality is that the change that they've been, that's been sort of fueling their optimism is actually still happening, even if the overall vote margins look worse this time around.
In Dallas County, the county has become even more solid blue than it was before because the Republicans didn't pick up any state house seats as they hoped, and all the countywide stayed Democrat. And in addition, the commissioner's court is now Democratic, all Democrat for the first time, in part because they redrew the one Republican district as a Democratic district. What does that say to you?
Look, this is, an important story here in Texas that I think needs to be understood, which is the continuing bluing of Texas's cities is a really big deal in this state. You know, a lot of the attention this cycle has been on vote shares in parts of South Texas that, when taken into consideration of the entire election, account for a very, very, very tiny share of the overall vote in the state, as opposed to a Harris County or a Dallas County or a Bexar County. And so what I think is going to be interesting in these coming days is a comparison of, you know, how much did Republicans pick up in their statewide vote for all the efforts they put into South Texas, and how does that compare to the gains that Democrats seem to continue to be making in places like Dallas County, Harris County, and even, you know, already extremely blue Travis County. And so I think, you know, when we go back and try to take a little bit more of a holistic look at this election, try to understand the various moving parts, it's going to be interesting to see what role the bluing of Texas's urban areas has on our understanding of the trajectory of the state as a whole.
And my final question to you, and I appreciate your time, and that is Tarrant County remains solid red. The governor won there by, I think, 4 percentage points, 51 to 47. Dan Patrick won 50 to 47. Ken Paxton won 50 to 47. And all the countywides won and are solidly Republican. And so I'm wondering, what does that say to you about that? I mean, that's the largest Republican county in Texas. It stayed that way. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, Tarrant County remains a very interesting bellwether for Texas. It was, you know, for a very long time, the largest Republican county in the state, and only in the previous 2 cycles did Democrats narrowly capture it. I think to expect that it would remain a Democratic county in perpetuity would be a little bit unrealistic. And so it's not surprising to see the county flip back in a more conservative direction, especially considering, honestly, the nature of all the political activity that's been going on in and around Tarrant County and the types of issues that have really been centralized around education. I think has really promoted a much more conservative brand of politics this cycle. But having said that, I don't necessarily think that if Donald Trump were on the ticket in 2024, Tarrant County is automatically going to be in the Republican column.
So it just depends on who's topping the ticket.
Definitely depends on who's on the top of the ticket, but it also depends on the overall environment. And in a county as competitive as Tarrant County, it's not surprising to see in an election, especially in the state that favored Republicans, for Tarrant to come back into the Republican column. It just is to say that in another election cycle that might favor Democrats more strongly, you could see Tarrant County inch back over into the Democratic column. I think it wouldn't be surprising to see it move back and forth for a little bit over the next few election cycles, depending on the conditions.
And Senator Ted Cruz is up for election in 2024, and everybody's waiting to see if he's going to run for re-election or run for president, based likely on what former President Donald Trump decides to do.
Yeah, I mean, Ted Cruz certainly has a lot of options at his disposal going forward, and it'll be interesting to see what he decides the next best move is for him. But no matter what, I think he will be a major player, certainly in the way that Texans view politics in the next election cycle.
Dr. Joshua Blank, Research Director at the Texas Politics Project at UT Austin. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me.
That's Eye on Politics for this week. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jack Fink, and you're watching CBS News, Dallas-Fort Worth.